right, well, why don't I get started? Thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to talk about mergers and acquisitions, more from a kind of tactical nuts and bolts perspective. I'll talk for a while, and then I'm sure a lot of you guys will have questions about the content that I'm presenting, but look forward to this kind of being a dialogue, and I tried to make it a little bit fun. A little bit of background about myself. I'm with a company called Serra Ventures. We're actually in the research park here, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our firm here in a minute. But I've been in the venture capital world for about 14 years, and during that time I've been involved in a number of different mergers and acquisition processes, both on the buy side, the sell side. I've been involved in transactions as a venture capitalist, as an entrepreneur. When I ran a company, I was involved. I bought a company, and as an advisor as well. So Serra is also helps companies through a sales process. So we do that. Prior to being a venture capitalist, I was an entrepreneur, like I think most of you guys are. How many in the crowd are running companies or starting companies or thinking about it? Yeah, quite a few. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here, right? So I was in your shoes. I started a company back in the late 90s called Digital Work, and grew it very rapidly and raised a bunch of venture capital financing. Part of me and our partners, we identify well with entrepreneurs. So a little bit about Serra Ventures. As I mentioned, we're in the park here, actually a couple buildings over. We're primarily a venture capital firm, so we help fund emerging and growth stage technology businesses in the Midwest. But we also have an advisory group within our firm that we can help on a consulting basis. I think we worked with a number of companies here at Enterprise Works through the iStart program. So we're pretty active on both the venture side and the advisory side. Maybe just to toot our horn a little bit here, we've been very active. We've invested in over 50 companies across the Midwest in the last 4 years. We've got about $40 million under management, and so we've made some investments, and maybe one of the reasons why I'm here to talk is we've also had some exits. So we've sold 6 companies in our portfolio so far. So that's a little bit about us. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, or you think we can be of value to you, you'll know how to reach me. So you can't start a talk without going through some data, right? There's obviously a lot of data out on the internet on mergers and acquisitions that you can kind of dig up. But I selected just a few slides to kind of talk through, just to give some context to maybe the rest of the talk on what's going on. So everybody wants to know, so how is mergers and acquisitions going? How's the volume going? 2015 was a great year, both in terms of volume of number of transactions and in terms of volume. As you can see kind of in that red circle area there. 2016 is, I think, still up in the air. First quarter was great from a volume perspective. As you can see, in that blue bar is up, but the number of transactions are down. So I think the jury's still out on how 2016 will shape up from a mergers and acquisitions perspective. A lot of people don't realize this, but everybody thinks when you sell a company, it's going to be worth $1 billion or they're big acquisitions. But the reality is, 70% of all transactions are under $100 million in value and exit. But when you really dig into that, you look at the median price. So the median price is really between $30 and $55 million over the last 3 or 4 years. We're trending up. I think 2015 or 2016, you were kind of at the top end of that. So keep that in mind when you go to sell your company, you're thinking about selling your company, or when you're thinking about your financing strategy. If you're going to take in $30 million of venture capital financing and the median is a $30 to $55 million sale, you better be pretty confident you're going to be in that above the $100 million mark. Another big question is, so what industries tend to get acquisition? Software, IT really is the dominant force. most of the transactions that you're seeing that would be represented in the kind of the blue, the light blue, and the IT and in the dark green bars are all kind of in that IT area. So keep that in mind as well when you think about your company and how you position it. You know, materials, science, you know, businesses, scientific companies tend not to get acquired as much as software and IT related companies. So the big question is, you know, why do companies get acquired in the first place? Well, there's a whole host of reasons why, you know, a company might want to buy you, or larger companies even doing acquisitions in the first place. I've listed, you know, a number of the common choices here, but it could be, you know, any combination of these. So some of the, you know, the top ones might be they want to, you know, enter into a new market that's maybe complementary to what they do. So Salesforce.com, you know, recently just bought one of the biggest e-commerce providers in the world. It was a multi-billion-dollar transaction, so they were at the top end of the previous graph. But Salesforce.com, obviously a leader in marketing automation, wanted to start to get into e-commerce. So they acquired a big company to establish a footprint in that particular market. So usually you're going to see bigger transactions. They're going to kind of, you're not going to enter a market unless you know you're going to get decent market share from the get-go. So a lot of the larger acquisitions that you'll see are for this kind of first reason here. They may want a new product to sell to their existing customers. Now, at the earlier stage, this is, you know, kind of a common reason why an early stage company might get acquired. Typically, the trade-off here is a build versus buy. You know, a more established company can say, okay, I could go engineer this new product. I know I want it, or I can buy the startup company that has. You know, they've been developing it for a few years. They've got some patents around it. They've got a team to maintain it. So this typically falls into that build versus buy kind of category. Another reason would be that you know, they want to add to their revenues and profits. So you may have heard the term roll-up before. So in certain industries, typically fragmented industries, companies might get funded by private equity firms to go acquire smaller players to build up revenue, build up profits, save costs across the acquisitions that they're doing, and build a bigger company through what's called a roll-up strategy. That's also very common. You know, other kind of smaller reasons, you know, acquiring new customers in kind of a similar, so a competitor might buy a competitor to buy their customers. There may be network effects through distribution that you might have that might be interesting to a potential buyer. You might have great technology that's protected by patents that is important to the potential acquirer, or maybe you just got a rock star team that the company's got to have, and, you know, PhDs or data science or what have you. Usually it's all kind of a combination of a lot of these different factors that kind of drive an M&A team to want to find and buy. So those are the reasons why you might get acquired someday. So I say this flippantly, but really there are two ways to be acquired. You're either, you guys may have heard this before, you're either bought or you're sold. It sounds logical, but they're two very, very different processes. If you're bought, that happens naturally. This means that somebody's seeking you out to go acquire your company, or you're sold, meaning that you're going through a sales process, which I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about, which you're marketing your firm, usually through a banker, to be acquired. And obviously, kind of ask the rhetorical question, which one do you think has a better outcome? Right, one. It's kind of obvious. So the question is, if one's a better outcome, how do you get bought? We like to say the way to get bought is to dance with the elephants. We call it biz dev to corp dev. So you're likely to going to get bought, and this seems logical, if you are known by your potential universe of buyers. They may not know, if they don't know who you are, most likely they're not going to be able to buy you. So you need to understand who in your ecosystem, in your business ecosystem, are likely acquirers, and go build partnerships with them. So it's important to invest early on in partnerships with companies that you might think might be willing to acquire you someday. Use your unique assets that you think you can bring to the table to establish those partnerships. And even if they're not strong partnerships, being on the radar screen of these companies is really the only way to be known to them. So your unique value might be your products, your distribution, your intellectual property. You might integrate from a product perspective with them, but do that early on. But be cautious, because if you dance with the elephants, you can get killed. And you can get killed because bigger companies obviously have a lot more resources, right, than smaller companies do. So they can absorb all of your time as a startup, make all kinds of great promises, and they tend not to move very fast. So working with a big company, what we call an elephant, could suck up all the resources of your company. They could make all kinds of empty promises, and you'll run out of money before they're ready to acquire you. So make sure you're able to partner with them, but do it in a very wise and strategic way. The other thing we encourage our entrepreneurs to do is know who in your industry is acquisitive and why they are. What are the trends? Why are they acquisitive? And who are the most active players? The top 10 active acquirers in 2015 were, all those logos should look pretty familiar to you, or most of them, with the exception of number 5. So private equity firms, these are companies that buy other companies and run them, are also potential acquirers. And as you can see, number 5 had a private equity firm, but a lot of those other companies aren't necessarily a surprise to you. So, but it's obviously different in every industry. So make sure you understand within your industry who are the acquirers and why do they do it and how often do they do it? Because the odds of you being the first acquisition by a company is very, very low. You never want to be the first. So if you're in an industry where there's companies that are acquiring for various reasons, make sure you get to know them early on, and make sure you know why they're buying. So that's very important. So that's a simple way. It sounds easy, right? So that's the way to get bought. Now, what are the reasons why you might enter into a sales process? Well, typically the major reason that we see is you just kind of run out of road. You're running out of capital. You're not able to raise enough money. You're not growing fast enough to attract additional venture capital. And like Thelma and Louise, you just kind of run out of options, and it's time to enter into a sales process. And by the way, those police cars are packed with your venture capitalists that are forcing you to do it. But be warned again that getting sold is not an easy process. You have to prepare for a long and arduous process. And I'll spend the next couple minutes talking about what that process looks like. The process can take 6 months. I guess we've seen one that happened really fast to well over a year. In fact, we know one company that's been at it for multiple years to make it happen. And don't think that if you enter into a process right out of the gates that it's going to be successful. Most of them aren't. I didn't bring up stats, but I believe something in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% of processes that are started are successful. So by no means is it, I'm going to go hire a banker, I'm going to go into a sales process, and it's going to work, and I'm going to be able to make an exit. That's not the case. But it does take a long period of time to do it well and to do it effectively. So here are some of the common activities that happen. So we call, and I'll go through some of this in more detail. There's pre-market activity. So you're marketing your firm to a set of buyers, just like you're marketing a product to a set of buyers. There's pre-market activity where you're really getting prepared to market your company. That typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. Then you're in kind of more of we call it the active marketing stage, where you're actively reaching out to prospective buyers, which can take 3 to 4 months or more. If you're lucky, then you can enter into what we call a buyer diligence phase, where you've been able to attract some interested parties, and they're going to want to look under the hood and get to know you as management a lot better. They're going to want to know the company and its assets a lot better as well. And think of this as a funnel. And then if you're lucky, you get enter into negotiations, which can take 1 to 2 months. And sorry, Alan, but once you get the lawyers involved, who knows how long it'll take, but it can take 2 to 4 months. You can make fun of venture capitalists in your next presentation. So you need a lot of documents to get ready to sell your company as well. And these are just a few of them that you'll work with your investment banker on to kind of pull together. And the first one is almost the most important, and that's a well thought out, prioritized target list of companies that you think could buy you. And I'm going to highlight well thought out and targeted. This is not a process where you kind of spray and pray that I'm just going to send an email to every company in the planet to see who might take the bait and want to talk. You want to think through who are the logical categories of buyers. Again, if you heeded my advice early on, where you're knowing who's acquisitive in your industry and around your industry, this might be an easier process. But think through who the logical buyers are, and research who they are and why, and then prioritize them. So you know who to spend the most time in the beginning and who might be a long shot. We tend to prioritize them into just very simple terms. Here's our A prospects, B prospects, and C prospects. So we know where we think we want to prioritize our time. You develop an anonymous teaser, so you don't make your name known. And the fun part is you get to create a secret code name for your business. It's not the name of your company. Maybe Project Spot or Project Big Data. You can come up with bankers are usually pretty good at coming up with a pretty nifty name. A complete financial package with your key metrics. So here you're preparing for the due diligence phase. You'll need an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. The biggest component of this is what we call a confidential information memorandum. This is kind of like the pitch deck that you might have to pitch to investors, but structured more around presenting the company for a sale. We call it a SIM. And then you'll begin to build a data room of due diligence information that will include any market research that you have. Employee contracts, believe it or not, are going to be very, very important. We went through one transaction where the team was very, very important to the company that was acquiring them. And they wanted to make sure that every employee, Alan, and you might remember this process, every employee had an employee contract, a non-compete agreement, and an venture disclosure, and then they matched that up against payroll stubs. So we were fortunate this company kept very good records, but that was very, very important to them. Technical and product information on your, maybe even setting up a GitHub for your code if you're a software company. So there may be code reviews as a part of a due diligence process. They're going to want to see your customer contracts, how they're structured. They're going to want to see examples of those. Customer case studies, and the list goes on. So you need to be well prepared, and obviously the better prepared you are out of the get-go, keeping track of all of this information, the better you're going to be prepared in an acquisition. But quite frankly, even in the venture capital process, this is a lot of the same information that you're going to want to have readily available for even venture investors to take your company seriously. So you got all those documents. This isn't AA, but they're still came up with 10 steps, a 10-step process. Any good process has at least 10 steps, right? And this is going to seem logical, but also think of it as a funnel. So at the beginning, it's a broad funnel, and then you're narrowing it down to one buyer. So it starts with this anonymous teaser that's being sent out to the target list that you have, and at Serra, we've done it in multiple ways. Email, LinkedIn. So this is you're trying to find even specific people. So you're not sending it to info@microsoft.com, for example. That's not going to get you anywhere. Or you're not sending it to the CEO of Microsoft or Mark Zuckerberg. He's not going to look at it. So you got to make sure you identify the buyer within the company, and your investment banker can help out with a lot of this process. Emails work, LinkedIn we've worked. Believe it or not, in one process we were involved in, we sent out letters, old snail mail, and we got quite a few responses to good old-fashioned snail mail. The teaser is usually also customized for the different types of buyers. So another reason to categorize these buyers is you may have a different selling proposition. Of all those assets I went through at the beginning, you might have a different selling proposition to one group of potential buyers versus another group of buyers. So the more specific you can make your list, the name of the people on the list, and the letter or information that they're going to get, you're going to improve the probability of getting a response that says, yes, I'm interested in learning more. So once they're interested in learning more, it's common we send them an NDA, so a non-disclosure agreement. And the reason why you send out the anonymous list is you don't necessarily want your competitors knowing that the company's up for sale, right? That can be disruptive to your sales process. They can use that against you in the selling process. So usually companies are very sensitive to their name kind of being out there that we're in the midst of a sales process. So that's usually the reason for the kind of secret code at the beginning. But after an NDA is signed, then you reveal the company name, and then you send them that nice document, the confidential information memorandum, the pitch, if you will. We set up a management presentation for you to actually deliver, just like you're raising money. And that's usually the first step. So you can think about a big list. You're hopefully whittling that down to some interested parties that are willing to sign an NDA. Some will take a presentation from you. And then they'll indicate that there's further interest. Again, you're narrowing your funnel. And then you invite them into the due diligence process where they're going to get to know you a lot better. We tend to open up a data room of all those documents that I talked about where they can kind of spend some time on their own, sifting through all your information to get more familiar with the company. And a lot of times, too, a buyer at this stage will say, okay, I appreciate all that information. Here's our list of additional items that we might need. They may want to do a site visit. They might want to do customer reference calls. There's all kinds of things that they might want to do. Next step, if you're lucky, is they'll provide a term sheet or an indication of interest with the high-level terms that they're willing to provide to the company. And if you have one, that's okay. The more you can get, the more competitive the process can be, and the probability of you kind of optimizing the best price it goes up. And then the legal closing process starts. So you think the negotiation is done. That's not true. Even throughout the legal process, you'll be negotiating verbiage in the documents. And then there's little gotcha points along the way that can come out and bite you. Things like negotiating the working capital adjustment, how much capital needs to stay in the company naturally. So the buyer will negotiate that. How long is the escrow? They're going to take, hold back some cash for an escrow, and give you that cash after they're confident that they bought what they thought that they were going to buy. So that's all the negotiation. And then you get signatures and you're closed. And it's a wonderful thing. So can you do this yourself? We say no. It's important to hire. We believe it's important to hire an investment banker. Really in both cases. In the case of being bought, where you've been approached by a partner and they want to buy you and they're willing to throw a big number on the table. Even the threat of saying I'm going to go hire an investment banker might drive the price up 4 to 5%. Because they know an investment banker can create a competitive process. Obviously, in the case of the managed sale process that I just went through, they're going to run that whole process for you. So they add a lot of value. They run the sales process. They drive up price through creating competition for your deal. This is often overlooked, but it's really important. I can promise you, if you're getting acquired, it will get ugly. There will be very difficult situations between you and the company that's going to be acquiring you. The bankers can walk away, but you're going to have to go work with these people. So the investment banker serves as a great buffer between management. They can be the bad guys, in other words, and represent the shareholders, where the management can say, I'm just relying on the advice of the buyer. So you guys can be friends when it comes time to work together as an integrated company. Bankers aren't necessarily cheap, but they're well worth it. Typically, they cost between $5,000 and $10,000 a month as a retainer. And the reason why they typically ask for this is because, remember, I mentioned that most sale processes aren't successful. So they need some compensation to do all the work that they're going to do on your behalf. And then, like selling a house, they'll take a percentage of the transaction, which can range from 4 to 6% typically. And then you get that retainer that you paid credited against the kind of the closing transaction fee. So that's pretty common, across the industry. So what are the elements of a deal? There's all cash, which is kind of the obvious one, and that's obviously the best, where a company's willing to just write a check, a nice clean check to you, and away you go. That doesn't happen all that often. The next most common one would be some upfront cash plus an earnout. So an earnout means that there's a carrot at several different points, typically time-based, where they want to keep the management team, the company, incentivized to think, okay, it's not time to go to the beach. I got to continue to work hard and continue to drive value in the company. So you got to hit revenue goals, maybe EBITDA goals, to get the other aspect of the buyout equation. You may get cash plus equity. So the buyer might say, I'm going to give you some cash, but also here's a chunk of stock in our company. Typically in a private-to-private transaction, this is important because they want to incentivize you to drive up the overall value of the company for an exit someday. And of course, it can be all the above. And we've seen every different flavor of these along the way. So I know you guys have been wondering, so okay, that's cool in the process, but what is my company worth? Your investment banker will say, well, it's worth whatever the market says it's worth, which is true. But there are some hints along the way that might give you a clue to what your company is worth. So the traditional metrics might be things like EBITDA multiples. So if you guys aren't financial people, EBITDA is a terminology of profits before depreciation and amortization. So they'll give you a multiple of EBITDA. I looked up, the median in 2019 was 9 times. So not every startup is profitable, but if you are, it will increase the likelihood of you being acquired. And you can think, okay, on average or on the median, I might get 9 times a revenue multiple or EBITDA multiple. Revenue multiple is also a common metric used, especially in, call it, high growth venture-backed startups that are growing the top line very quickly, and for conscious reasons have decided to invest in the company and not be profitable. So getting paid a multiple of revenue is also common, and that might vary in different industries. But then there's other 2 important factors to consider. So your multiples will be higher if you're growing fast. That's even true in the public market. So a company might have a higher PE ratio, like a Facebook, for example, if they're growing very, very fast. The same is true in private transactions. Or recurring revenue is also valued very, very high, much higher than transaction revenue or service revenue. And the reason is it's repeatable. So you may have heard the model SaaS, so software as a service, where you might sign 3-year or year-long contracts and realize that revenue over the course of those contracts. So you've got deferred revenue. So you've got a bucket of revenue to be earned later. So you're going to get a higher credit for that type of revenue. Then there's non-traditional ways. How many users do you have? What's the value of your network? These are all very soft and cushy things. What's your technology and patents? And I threw this one in for you guys. There's been jokes that say you can get 2 million times the number of PhDs you have, and that's a good multiple to consider. So that's all good theory. I thought I'd kind of walk you through a fictitious example, and to do that, I'm going to show you a video of the company that I chose to walk you through. The company's called Licky Brush. And it's not working. Where's the IT guy? One second. That was anticlimactic. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it wants me to enter into a...
Oh, is it connected to the wireless?
Yeah. It's not working.
You were connected then?
Yeah, but it's not. Every time I type in something, this comes up. Okay, sorry about that. All right, you guys ready? It's amazing you can't get Wi-Fi in a high-tech place. All right.
That's really just as a form of social.
You're plugged into the output?
Yeah.
As a human, you're left out of this intimate ritual. With Licky Brush,
Nothing worked. Very high-tech device. They've done their segmentation work.
like your cat.
That's a lot of fun. So what is Licky Brush worth? So I'm going to walk you through. Here's a fictitious, obviously, example of what happened to this high-growth tech startup called Licky Brush. It's obviously, as you saw, here's the situation: a very high-tech device that enables you to lick your cat, as if you are a cat. Over the course of several years, they raised $10 million in venture capital funding across 3 different rounds. They did a seed round of $1 million of preferred seed. They hit their growth stride and raised a $3 million Series A, where they were able to protect their product and perfect the manufacturing process and get it to market. And then they really started to scale. They raised $6 million in Series B preferred venture. And this is a joke, obviously, guys, right? $6 million in Series B preferred. And along the way, the investors ended up owning, through this process, they ended up owning 60% of the company. And the common shareholders ended up owning about 40% of the company. Believe it or not, Licky Brush reached $25 million in sales over that period of time, generating $5 million in EBITDA. They have an all-cash offer from a very large pet company for $50 million. So Licky Brush did very, very well. So as a part of this example, I want to walk you through. So after you sell, a lot of people wonder what happens after that and how is the cash distributed. Until you've been through the process a few times, it can be an eye-opener. And I created what we tend to call a waterfall analysis. And I obviously made this up and simplified it. But this will be illustrative, and I don't know if you can read that very well, so I'll kind of walk through what the major elements of what happens to the cash when a company decides to acquire you. So at the top line there, you can see, okay, Licky Brush was acquired for $50 million. Then there's a series of adjustments that tend to happen. One is if you have debt on your balance sheet, that's taken off. If you have cash on the balance sheet, typically you can negotiate that to be added in to the equation. And then I mentioned this earlier, working capital adjustment. This can be kind of the heart of a negotiation. In fact, I've seen sales fall apart over this simple number or this simple concept. So this is basically the amount of cash that the buyer would expect to be in the company to manage normal course of operations. So what does normal course of operations mean? It might mean managing the difference between your accounts receivable and your accounts payable. If you're a manufacturing company, it might have to do with inventory and how much inventory needs to be had, or seasonal effects on your business. So a great deal of analysis will go in. As a company, you're a banker. If you hire a banker, we'll help you develop a positive perspective on what that number should be. Most likely the buyer will have a different perspective, and this will be another negotiation point during the process. I mentioned earlier that there are also escrows that will be held back in an acquisition, When you go through the documents, you'll sign your life away with reps and warranties and indemnifying the buyer that nothing bad's going to happen. And usually after about 18 months, they don't believe you, of course, so they want to hold money back. And then about after 18 months or so, they will release that capital to you. You got patents, and you say that, no, we're not infringing on anybody's patents. They say, we're not so sure, so we're going to hold back escrow. And typically that's negotiated as well. So after that, Licky Brush was bought for $50 million. After the debits and credits against adjustment, there was $38,500,000 left to begin to. Oh, I forgot one of the most important things. You got the transaction fees. So that nifty banker, remember him? I'll go back and see him. This guy. Remember he's going to take 4 to 6, let's say 5% of your company. So he's going to get $2.5 million for all of his hard work that guy did. And Alan, I don't know if that number's big enough, but you can budget like $500,000 for. A
couple of those a year,
yeah.
We're all set.
Okay. $500,000 for a deal this size is not, believe it or not, out of the question to expect. So that leaves you with $38,500,000. So as you'll probably remember from one of your venture capital talks here, I would hope you can remember that venture firms typically buy preferred equity. Remember that? Does everybody remember the difference between preferred and common equity? So preferred means is they get their money out first. That's why it's a preference. So the venture capitalists remember 10 million went into Licky Brush in preferred equity, so they get that 10 million back, and then that leaves you with 28,500,000 left. Have the employees or the common shareholders gotten anything yet? No, they haven't. So there's 28 million left, and then the preferreds, they still own 60% of the company. So they're going to get 17 million, and roughly, and the founders and the employees are going to get 11 up front. So the reason I walk you through this example is you can see all of the costs in the process. You sell your company for 50 million. If you've raised venture, you're not necessarily going to be putting 50 million in your pocket, and this is a structured way to think about that. But the good news is after 18 months, you're going to get some money back from the escrows. So that's a typical, we call that a waterfall analysis. And I said I simplified this immensely. It is a lot more detailed. I didn't calculate, there's employee stock options and all sorts of other factors that will come into play when actually calculating that. Payroll, all sorts of additional variables will go into this calculation. Again, a reason to have a banker involved. So that gives you a feel for, we walked through the data, types of acquisitions, the process, and we even walked through an example. So hopefully that gives you a good feel for how M&A works in high-tech startups. And of course, all good talks end with some myths revealed. And I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones that we could come up with that we continuously hear. Especially in the research park here, that most of the companies are steeped in awesome technology, well protected through the OTM, highly licensed and well protected by our fine law firms in Champaign. The idea that you can somebody's going to buy my company for the technology. It happens from time to time, but you don't see it very, very often. So if you think that your fallback or your safety net is, hey, I'll just sell the company for lots of money for the technology, I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but I wouldn't want to bet my life on it. I wouldn't want that as a safety net. The other big one is, I'll wait till I run out of cash to sell my company. As you just saw through the process and what you got to pay for the banker, and it doesn't happen overnight. If you're Thelma and you see that the end of the road coming, and you've got to see out 6 or 9 months, get your process started early. If you have venture firms, they may even help bridge or provide some capital to get to the process if you commit to making it happen. So that's a big one. You hear this all the time. Well, remember those traditional metrics that I walked through? Revenue multiples, EBITDA, all that kind of financial stuff. I'll say, that doesn't apply to my business. I'm super cool. I've got a lot of users, or again, you can get bought for that, but not a great safety net. You're not going to optimize your value. Others, revenue in my market is more valuable, so I'm going to get a higher multiple. This fifth one's a big one. Oftentimes investment bankers, they won't take on just any project, right? Because they're, especially the good ones, they're bandwidth constrained as well, and their reputation is going to be on the line in terms of getting transactions completed. So they'll evaluate the probability of getting your company sold in their own minds. So even if you want to sell and hire a banker, that might not be the case. And although Licky Brush dispelled this myth, just because you're Kickstarted as well doesn't mean you're going to get bought. That's all I got.
What about the tax implications of all this? Is there any way of minimizing that?
Yeah, so remember I said there's a lot more detail in that waterfall? Yeah, taxes are always a function in there. I am not a tax expert by any means, so usually you're hand in hand with the investment banker. They'll seek to structure a transaction and with your attorneys in the most tax efficient way as possible. But it is complicated, depending upon a whole lot of factors: what states you're in, how your business is structured, etc. So is it all cash or stock? And so even when you get stock, for example, individually, because it's part of the transaction, although you're not getting cash day one, you'll most likely have to pay taxes on that stock. So you might have to use some of your cash to offset the perceived value of the stock that you received. So yeah, I should have included taxes is a big gotcha, and you need to have people know what they're doing to make sure you're doing it appropriately.
Earlier in this presentation, you were talking about how it's not too common, or not a lot of scientific startups are acquired. Something along those lines. So why? What do you mean by that?
It was just the data. I think it's a function of who's buying. So.
What's the apprehension?
I mean, I don't know the motivation, behind it. I think so. Software companies just tend to, they're growing faster. They've got more cash on hand. Maybe integration's easier. But it's just the data shows that most likely acquisitions are going to happen in the software and IT world. Maybe it's more culturally oriented. I mean, so to grow by acquisition is kind of embedded in the bigger company's culture a lot of the times. So maybe scientific oriented companies aren't as steeped in that kind of culture.
About for healthcare companies, do a lot of I guess people sometimes fear healthcare companies because a lot of regulations come with it. Is that something that
Yeah, I mean, perhaps, but usually if a healthcare company is buying a healthcare company, they probably would be aware of kind of what they're getting.
So for a startup, is 9 times the EBITDA, is that a very low estimate?
That was the median. That was the median last year. Yeah.
9 times? What's on the high side?
Infinite, because companies get bought for with no profits. So service companies are going to be lower. SaaS companies, recurring revenue might be 4 to 7 times revenue, depending upon how fast they're growing. So yeah, a part of the banking process is doing all I'm talking in generalities here, but yeah, you got to do your homework specifically to the category that you're in to start to understand the nuances in the category that you're in.
So in your 10-step process of how it could look like in the managed phase, the first one was basically sending out something saying that there is something to acquire. How do you formulate that to not look like a spam type of thing? Because you can't say who you are and what your product is and how free it is.
Right. So a couple ways. One, remember I said that be as specific as you can in terms of the type of person that you're going to reach out to. Tweaking the teaser to be more specific to that company. I'd also say that a lot of investment bankers will already have relationships with the M&A department of Microsoft or Amazon or whatever the company is. So as you decide to sell yourself, even investment banking firms might specialize in different industries too, where they have a stronger network. So yeah, that's why that targeted list is really important, and hopefully that lines up with a network that you can tap into. Great. Is everybody ready to sell their companies? Hopefully. All right. Thank you.